Kia ora everyone. My name is Clayton Wikaira. I come from Hokianga up in the north on the west coast. I'm just putting together a podcast around safer diving, and currently I work for Drowning Prevention Auckland, and my main kaupapa is to be able to support Māori around the waters, in particular diving. And teaching whānau, those that are learning how to dive, those that maybe experience, we share those experiences that we've had with whānau, and it's a great mahi. So hopefully today you may learn something about how we can keep ourselves a lot safer. So I'm just going to share my screen and I'll go through a presentation, and hopefully learning can occur. So I've been with Drowning Prevention for 4 years, and we look at educating whānau through formal settings like education, and we also go into our communities and also workplace areas. Just a little bit of background about my water experience. I've been paddling doing waka ama for about 16 years, and I've been to places all around the world: Hawaii twice, Tahiti twice, Rarotonga around 6 times. I've been to Canada and also New Caledonia. One common theme that I've picked up while paddling around the world is the waters are beautiful and warm, particularly in the Pacific, and the water's a lot more buoyant. And whereas New Zealand, the water's a lot colder and it's less buoyant, where you sink a lot. So I found that those experiences for me, being here in New Zealand, we have to be extra careful of not getting hypothermia. Also, my other passion and background is basically I've been diving for over 30 years, and mainly all that diving has occurred on the west coast. I've had a few experiences of nearly drowning myself, and one of those particular experiences, I was learning how to dive. I went for a dive with one of my whanaungas, Conrad Leaf, and we were diving at the start for power, and then he goes, "Oh, why don't we head out the back and look for some crayfish?" So I was keen as to go. At that particular time, we didn't have any buoyancy aids. Those are things like to hold your sack or to have a rest if you got tired. We also use a technique up there in the north where we put a big shirt over our wetsuit. We tie a knot at the bottom. We put our weight belt over the top of that knot, just so when we put power down, they don't fall out of the bottom. And then we end up taking our kai to the sack. Well, many of us still use that technique today. Well, but this time I actually didn't have any buoyancy aids or anything at that time. As I said, I was still learning. And my mate points to this far out reef. So we're right in the open. There's no rocks around us. And I thought, well, at least when I get there, I can have a rest. So Conrad, as we go over and we get to the reef, he goes, "Oh, can you hold on to my sack?" So he had about quarter full of power in the sack. I had a shirt full of power still in my shirt. And I let him carry on looking for crayfish while I held on to his catch. As I look up, I see these massive sets coming through waves, and I get blown off the reef, and white water is going over the top, and next minute I'm struggling to get to the top. I'm realizing that there's no buoyancy because it's aerated. It's got air in the water, and you sink quicker to the bottom. So I managed to get myself to the top, and then Conrad comes up next to me and I pass him a sack and chuck it to him and say, "Here's your sack, I'm going back in." And then I started kicking back in. Anyway, I made it safely to another reef and rock that wasn't in the impact zone, and I was able to recover and get my breath. And that was one of my first learning experiences about just being aware. And I always had respect for the moana, but you can still get a little bit um, confident, overconfident, and think that you're better than what you really are. And so that was one of my first experiences of realizing that um, you have to be really aware of your surroundings. And I went back to my brother and my brother-in-law, and we talked about the incident. And I just said we need to have something like buoys or things that can hold our catch bags, so it takes the weight off us. So we first started with just water containers that had a little ring in it, so we could thread our ropes through. We had an anchor at the bottom, and we would attach our sacks to these containers, and then we slowly started getting proper buoys um, and using buoys. And now that's the method that we use, is 2 buoys with a rope and our anchor attached to it. So that is our safety device. There are 3 main reasons, why someone will get into difficulty. And it can be a combination of these whole 3. People always ask me, oh man, why do people drown all the time? No one actually intends to drown. They're going out doing their thing, whether it's having fun on the beach and getting caught in the rip, or whether it's diving for kai moana. But one thing that we've identified is your equipment. Not having all the correct equipment can get you into difficulty pretty quickly. For example, if you're wearing shoes and you ain't got flippers, if you're wearing bare feet and you ain't got fins, that's the quickest way to get sucked out if you haven't got the right gear. And fins particularly are the ones that give you propulsion in the water and can move you a lot faster and a lot quicker in currenty water than your bare feet does, okay, or your brand new Nike shoes. So equipment is one. Also, the competency of the individual is the second one, depending on how much experience that person has, okay. And usually experience only comes with time in the water, time going out with different people and gathering your skill base and your knowledge and understanding that goes, you learn as you go, should I say. So even with the competency and capability, that all depends also on the age of the person. And I'm not putting anyone that's old down, because we have a lot of experienced divers that are in their 60s and even 70s and are still beautiful, awesome divers today. But age has a big impact, especially if you haven't been diving for a long time and you think you're still young and you're just going to go to the coast and chuck on your gears like you did when you were 19 and think that you're going to be all right. For myself, your breathing, the affects your breathing and just your whole stamina in being able to look after yourself. So that can be a risk. Now, you can also have the opposite, where you could have someone who's really, really fit, but has no experience and can definitely get themselves into trouble quite quickly. So you got to have a balance between that. And the third reason factor that people can get into difficulty, it depends on where they're diving and what kind of tide or weather conditions they're diving in. West Coast is always pretty rugged. You're always getting movement, waves moving in and moving out. On the East Coast, it can also become really nasty there too, but not as bad as the West Coast most of the time. Most of the time on the East Coast, the water's clear, clean, and you can have really great experiences of diving. Whereas on the West Coast, many a times the visibility is terrible and you're always getting movement or current. But when it does settle down and you have good strong easterlies, and the West Coast is a beautiful coastline to be able to dive, and you can do it safely. There's a lot of fear around diving on the West Coast, but it's just having experience of diving at the right times. Okay, so those are the three main areas where people get into difficulty, is a combination of those three. Now, I can give you scenarios for all of them. Someone might be really, really confident with diving, and they may have dived on the East Coast most of their life, and then they go to the West Coast, and then they're realizing they can't see anything. The waves are pushing them backwards and forwards. They can't stay on their spots. And then they realize they're getting tired and they got to try and kick back in. And they're trying to navigate through all these different aspects of the weather conditions. And those can be learning experiences. And what we encourage around that is going out to areas that you don't know. Always go with locals or people that know their stuff. Then they can help you. They can help you with making the right decisions. Okay. And also just having all the correct gear. So there's other areas that can cause risk. So we mentioned someone's fitness, their age, the ability or their lack of experience, the gear that they may have. They mightn't have all their correct gear, or they might have gear and they don't know which is the most appropriate gear for the different conditions. And even preparation. Some people may drink alcohol the night before and think it's all sweet diving the next day, and even having a lack of sleep. Many of these things can actually contribute to putting yourself more at risk. So there's other things like when we're diving for crayfish, sometimes we go into cave areas and they start getting narrow. Then we start trying to wiggle ourselves in to extend to grab crayfish. We can actually get lodged in or stuck in cracks if we're not careful. Even in caves, going into places forward, one thing that I've always been told, that if you go in one way, you come out the same way. You don't go in and try and turn around in a cave or in a whole area, because you could get yourself into difficulty and get stuck. Also, other risk factors is I never ever attach any bags to me, like tied or clipped to me, just in case they get wedged between a rock. I'm trying to get to the top and they get stuck, and I'm trying to deal with that. When you're under the water, and if you have an experience like that where you may have even put your hand down the hole, you got to grab a crane, and as you extend your hand can't fit back out. You actually got to straighten it back up again. These are all things that you learn as you go, and it comes with experience. But all those things can be risk factors. So how we overcome all those, with what I do with my programs is, this is just an example. This image here is an example of someone diving with their shoes and haven't got a wetsuit. And that could be fine in areas where he's doing that there. But if he goes over into the other side where there's a bit more current, then those shoes won't work too well in current. Okay, so we can just cover shallow water blackout also. So shallow water blackout is basically someone fainting under the water whilst holding their breath. This is a huge concern, especially this can apply to really experienced divers and ones that can hold their breath between a minute to 4 minutes. They may feel really well under the water, like they got heaps of oxygen. Then when they start to come back to the top and surface, some of them, when they get to the top, can actually black out before they get to the surface, and then they'll just start sinking to the bottom. So usually with free divers, a lot of them, it's good practice to dive with a buddy or with buddies. So one drops, especially if you're diving like 20, 30, 40 meters, and you just monitor them as they shoot their fish and they come to the top. Then once they're settled, then you can go. This is a good practice to do if you're under the water for extended amount of time holding your breath. If you haven't got anyone that's monitoring you and you faint, it's pretty much straight away you're going to be at the bottom of the ocean, and it's not a nice experience. If someone does faint and you're there and you bring them to the top of the water, you can hold their chin on the back of hold their chin and put a hand on the back of their neck, lift them up. It's important to take their mask off and to blow into their receptors under their eyelids and around their face and talk to them and keep trying to get them to gain their consciousness through blowing on their face and talking to them. If that doesn't work, you can do a couple of breaths into their mouth and then keep doing it. It usually might take around 15 seconds for them to come back around. So I've got a video here. I think on the next one, we can just show just one little example. And this wasn't a good example, but it was just one that I picked up on YouTube that gives a little demonstration of what can happen.
Many thanks to Valerio on producing such great informative content on blackouts. Victim surfacing from a dive in a state of hypoxia, loss of motor control, exhales early, blacking out, not making it to the surface. Dive buddy goes to help him, doesn't know how to grab him or position him, brings him to the top, does not know what to do.
In that case, he should have just taken off his mask, put his hand behind his head. If you're struggling to keep them above the water, you can release their weight belt straight away.
The best way to recover the victim is to hold the head in a hyperextended position to align the airways open. Remove the mask, blow into the sensory receptors below the eye, tap on his cheek, and tell him to breathe. Repeat the process for 15 seconds, after which, if the victim does not regain consciousness, initiate forceful mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. And if needed, CPR. In this situation, the captain should never abandon the ship. You should position the vessel on windward side of the victim, stop the forward momentum of the boat, and grab the victim and pull him into the boat.
So that was just an example of shallow water blackout and what it actually looks like. Like the guy said, the worst thing that you can do is if there was wind and the guy jumped off his boat and there was no one on the boat, there's times you'd never catch the boat depending on the type of conditions they're in. So that's one thing. But how we reduce all the risks and what I've been doing around Auckland and even up the north, I've run a few wānanga or dive sessions up there, is this teaching whānau how to use the buoys. So these are the buoys here in the yellow. Our sacks are attached to them. Why we have two together, it gives us the opportunity to rescue someone and they can go underneath the armpits. It keeps their airways above the water and you can pull someone in who's totally exhausted, that has no energy. With one buoy, that's very difficult because they'll need to try and hold themselves onto the buoy, and also it won't hold as much weight, whereas two buoys holds quite a bit of weight. And also you can attach a few sacks to that and it holds your catch. Okay, so I run workshops within around Auckland, just at swimming pools at the start, or if you live up in the country, you can do it in your rivers and creeks. and I just chuck power shells and stuff in for them to dive for. As they're diving for the power shells, they take them to the sacks, and then I just keep them, getting them used to equalizing is also important, so you don't blow your eardrums, is pinching your nose and blowing gently. You don't want to blow too hard because you can bust your eardrums. But equalizing is also important to protect your ears. As you go deeper, there's a lot more pressure on your body, and by pinching your nose and blowing gently or moving your jaw, you can actually help that process of releasing that pressure in your ears. My brother blew an eardrum on one of his dives, and it was only in the shallow. And basically, he had fluid coming out of his ear, and it's part of that gel, that fluid that keeps your balance. So he was seeing things on the side. It wasn't straight. He was disorientated, and I was lucky I was right there with him. I gave him the buoys. He sat on the buoys for a while till he come right, but that was the end of his dive for that day. He also got sick, got nausea because of just the movement and the imbalance. But it doesn't have to happen in deep water. Blowing your eardrum can happen also in shallow water. So from the pool session, then we take them out to Whangaparo, and we give them experience of diving for kina there. So they have their own sacks attached to their own buoys. And basically, I just let them go hard, and I just monitor, making sure they're safe. We also have a support boat with qualified lifeguard on the boat too. And we also have a defib for any emergencies if we needed any emergencies. But it's a real great program, and we get a lot of great results, great feedback from kura kaupapa, secondary schools, the Māori units, on how much the kids love being able to go out and learn proper techniques to keep themselves safe while diving. We've covered equipment, so I find with having a wetsuit, it's beautiful, keeps you warm, you don't get cold, it also can protect you from rocks. But in order for that, you need to have a weight belt. Now, usually your weights is 1 kilo to 10 kilo of weight for a person. So if I gave you an example, someone was 80 kg, then they might need between 7 and 8 kg worth of weight. And you just have to mix and match to what's comfortable for you. For me, I weight myself a lot lighter, so I'm kicking slightly to get down, and then when I release, I'm just naturally coming up with my own buoyancy, so I'm not actually sinking to the bottom. And I find it works perfectly for me. So if someone's 100 kg, you might need around 9 to 10 kilo of weight, or even more if you're finding it hard to get down. And also ensuring that you're using buoyancy aids. Now, we used to use tire tubes back in the day, and some people still use them. I'm not saying that they're not good, but they can be quite difficult when you load them up. If you're diving offshore and you got to swim back in with them, they can be quite heavy and hold a lot of resistance, and can make you quite tired trying to drag that back in. Whereas I find the buoys a lot lighter and buoyant, and they're easily pulled on top of the water. Okay. So just wrapping up this, I've taken hundreds of our whānau out for dives, and just being able to teach them correct ways. When I'm talking about correct, making sure that you just have all the gear and all the safety equipment, and you know what you're doing. Okay, we always encourage to go out with experienced divers, because many a times they can share their knowledge, their experience with you whilst diving. Okay, so It's one of the most beautiful things that you can obtain is, that saying where give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, teach him how to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. It's so true. You have the ability to gather kai moana for your whānau, and people give you a lot of respect and acknowledgement for being able to gather kai for tangi or birthdays or whatever gatherings that you may have. Also, just covering off, we have under our customary rights to get a permit from your marae to get more kai for a bigger gathering of people. Okay. And I would encourage you to find out who your marae, your kaumātua and your permit holders are to keep yourself safe. If you get 3 times over your catch, you can lose all your gear, your boat, your car, whatever that you have if you've got 3 times over a certain species. Okay, if it's kina, pawa, crayfish, whatever it may be, fish. So just, having an awesome day, an awesome experience is just making sure you follow those rules there. And it's a great blessing to be able to have a permit where you can get more kina and more power for a big gathering, and you can do it without, getting everything confiscated. You have that right to, as long as you go through your marae. So I just like to encourage everyone to also do that. If you see any of my other posts up on Facebook, you can give me a holler, contact me. I'll be happy to do a live podcast where we can have a bit of interaction, where other experienced divers can share some of their experiences around close calls and near misses that we can learn from. Okay, I spoke to one, just on closing off, one more story where experienced guy was spearfishing, and he speared a good sized kingfish. I don't know what happened, but when it took off, the line wrapped around his arm and was pulling him down, and he was already at the end of his breath, so he was trying to kick up while this massive kingi was still pulling him down. And he did all the right things of being able to relax, think what was happening through and how he could get that line off. And anyway, he was able to live to tell the tale of just being careful for your lines when you shoot a big fish, because they have a lot of power underwater, and that could have turned into a nasty incident. So whānau, that's my podcast for today. Hopefully you've learned something. And please share this podcast to any other whānau or groups. Hopefully they may pick something up. This is Clayton Mikara signing off for now. Ka kite anō, be out there diving, making sure you're safe and you're looking after whānau, and you bring that beautiful kai home, and also give it out to the koe and kaumātua. They'll love you even more. Thank you, whānau. Kia ora koutou katoa. Signing off.